And hello from the campus of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We welcome you to today's SEI webcast, Achieving Balance, Agility, MBSE, and Architecture. My name is Shane McGraw. I'm the Outreach Team Lead here at the Software Engineering Institute, and I'd like to thank you for attending. We want to make our webcast today as interactive as possible, so you can submit questions in the YouTube chat area now, and we will get to as many as we can. Now I'd like to introduce my guest for today. Dr. Peter Capell's 33-year affiliation with the SEI has included work for space, process, computer emergency response, and currently the Agile transformation team. Peter has provided analysis and insights to several government programs across all services in the intelligence community. Peter has authored publications related to topics related to software process improvement, training systems, and the application of modeling in government systems. Welcome, Peter. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Shane. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. Shane, at the very beginning of this, we had a registration question.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm going to ask the forgiveness of, I would say public speaking is not my first skill. So you'll see me, perhaps, I hope not bobbling too much the clicker and as well as my notes, but I am going to be using notes because I have certain messages that I want to make sure we get across here. But the question to you all is, what are some of the issues you've seen when MBSE and vision are not aligned? And so now we have kind of the collection to present for you. How many did you end up getting? Do you know?
I think 53 total responses.
So someone picked up on the fact that I'm a movie buff, okay? And one of my favorite movies and one of the key examples from our presentation today comes from the original Star Wars. So stay on your toes. I'm going to ask you to search for some things at some point. I love these comments. These comments showed me something that really our audience today is very much in tune with the issue that we're going to discuss. I picked out a few that I'm going to discuss later on that were kind of, they bubbled to the top. But by no means wants to diminish any of your contributions, however. They were all great. I looked at every one. I also wanted to add that if you want follow-up on any of these questions, you can write to an address that will be provided at the end of the presentation.
Sure. So based on what we're watching now, Peter, obviously programs can go haywire when things aren't aligned. What's the takeaway for the discussion today? What's the thing people should walk away with?
Well, bottom line is alignment is important.
Yeah.
Alignment of the elements is important and can be a make or break factor in regards to how the program is conducted. And anyway, shall I talk?
Yeah, what jumped out at you?
What jumped out at me was one of the ones. It was beautiful because it gave me humor, laugh out loud humor, plus the fact that it says, I will read to you, okay? I do not have the hands-on experience to answer this question, but I think the residential apartments collapsing all over a certain country and the bridge to nowhere on the campus of Stony Brook College. To me, that's marvelous. I hope you have a career as an engineer because it's exactly the kind of consequence that I stay up at night about. Among the others then, unmet business stakeholder expectations, surely, absolutely. Loss of time, funding, and unsatisfactory delivery towards product solution outputs and mission objectives or goals. That's fantastic. This person should be sitting here maybe instead of me. Lack of clear strategic focus and poor adoption. Awesome, amen. Usually this results, and this is another answer, usually this results in sprawling MBSE models that are trying to answer too much and not focus on the true north vision. So I have an example of that from my own experience that we'll get to later. And project management and systems engineering are not in sync. Again, I could not pick a better set than I received. I'm so astounded. But thank you very much, audience, for these contributions.
Next question for you, Peter. So the genesis of the talk was you did an article for Crosstalk.
Correct.
So in that article, in the title of this webcast, in some of the responses we got from the audience, we see several terms: MBSE, DevSecOps, Agile, digital engineering, for example. What are the relationships to each other? We don't have to define. I know our audience know these terms, but what's the relationship?
So I don't mean to misdirect, but I thought we'd start kind of with the Agile backstory,
Sure.
which begins in the early 2000s. I have colleagues that will argue the details of when and what began, but I definitely am not in that category. In the early 2000s, a prestigious group of leaders, business and software development masters, I'd say, came together at a ski resort in Snowbird, Utah. I mean, this is the backstory. And over that period of time, and I think it was a couple of weeks, they came up with the Agile Manifesto. The reason that's important is because that manifesto, the principles of the manifesto, have been driving Agile implementations ever since. Okay, and I am going to make this meaningful to you in a minute. But among other things, we have practices came out of that, 7 to 10 person teams, highly focused, daily accountability, greater team autonomy, among other benefits. Then, and I'd say then, about 2009, again, my colleagues may argue when the genesis of Agile at scale began, but Agile at scale implies what it is. It's the making of bigger stuff using Agile methods. And so there was a recognition that the original Agile was not itself sufficient for certain applications of specific scope and scale, right? And it also, another element of that expansion into the bigger kind of program was that the focus becomes, yes, software still, but also we have to include systems now. You know, government implementations are by and large systems, some smaller, but many very large. And this became the focus of approaches to scaled Agile. I'm trained in one of them, for example, called Scaled Agile framework, and I'm an SPC, for example. And so I've had some pretty deep engagement with programs, and that's the basis from which I'm speaking today. So I wanted to note, you saw the word balance in the title of this presentation and of the article. The balance, I feel, I've always treated the Agile Manifesto as a set of balances, and they're implied. I realize they're implied because I've seen slides since that explicitly call out the fact, but I'll read a couple of them. Customer satisfaction is the highest priority, achieved through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Now we would add perhaps system capabilities, software and systems capabilities. Using face-to-face communication is the most effective way to convey information. So the balance in that case is face-to-face over heavy documentation,
I think we have a slide for that too, Peter, if you want to go to that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, slide 10 maybe.
Oh, okay. Smarter than I thought, maybe. These are these are the principles of the Agile Manifesto. And so I just wanted to call them out as kind of the Agile origin story. But how did they change? How would they change? It's a big question, because you come in contact with larger scale and it's not really always so obvious. And so I'll throw in here a concept that I'm introducing. It's called just enough. And you asked me, for example, what does that mean?
Yes.
You know, well, the question of just enough is always how much? How much of this, how much of that? And it requires careful thinking, because a lot of times Agile gets, in my view, misinterpreted as let's go fast. Let's go fast can't really happen if you think about anything you do as a practice. If you play tennis, if you play ping pong, if you jump rope, if you run, your practice doesn't start out fast. It starts out that you have to become competent, just like me with this clicker, before you could become good at something, right? It takes time and patience and discipline. Anyway, so often there's this judgment call that I feel is sometimes given a tad short shrift, but we'll get to that. my personal exposure to Agile at scale to Agile period is 2008, with the great work of my boss at that time, Marianne Lapham, and who kind of dove in with both feet. And then about 2012, I got a very serious concentration began in Agile at scale. And like I said, it's really Agile at scale is the implication of building bigger stuff using Agile methods, but often we get contributions from other areas. And of course, you mentioned DevOps, DevSecOps, and Lean. And this has held sway ever since, people trying to hovering around what's the best formulation of these methods. How can we build discipline in teams? How can we build cooperation? And these are the issues that pop up when you have something beyond 7 to 10 people. Now you have teams of teams being orchestrated across many, many areas and very many disciplines typically. So they can't be siloed any longer. But I kept noticing an issue, and this is one of those things that haunts you and at least in my case, wakes me up at night, is the notion that there's a kind of a tension and a long-standing bias against big design up front. And I'll confess that I conflated big design to big planning, but either way you look at it, something big happening up front, there's a prejudice against it. I can tell you why the prejudice. I believe we talked about that before, you and I, that the prejudice kind of begins with the fact that you begin this very large scale development and this very large scale design. Many things may change in the course of the multiple years that it typically takes to get something fielded. And so
I can imagine an endless number of government programs and projects.
Yeah, that it's kind of the practice. In fact, I do have a slide if you want to see the kind of let me see where I put it, legacy. I have to say I am, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
This is called the horse blanket. It's the legacy. Now it's been rewritten to accommodate newer practices. But this is the image that our government was running for acquisitions in general for 60 years. And it's complex. Mm-hmm. And it's not complex because people are dumb. It's complex because people are smart. Mm-hmm. Each one of the additions in here was the result of somebody's hard-earned experience. And so it's not something you can simply throw away. Okay. I'll go somewhere else here. That's me. Hi. Anyway, sitting here. So I kept noticing this issue about big design up front, and I kept wondering, how can even Agile at scale, how can they avoid this? And why is this bothering me so much? And this is when I came up with this image. I don't say I came up, I didn't invent this. The Mackinac Island Bridge popped out of my mind at some point. I get inspired by things, I have to tell you, dreams and whatnot. And the Mackinac Island Bridge, for some reason, symbolizes a lot of things that we've already discussed, you and I, about the fact that it would be a very difficult thing to think about building such a structure in 2-week increments. Now, I'm not saying that's impossible, but it's not going to happen without architecture and without modeling and without serious consideration of certain questions that have to be answered up front. E.g., and you can do this as a mental exercise yourselves at home there. What's going to have to be the maximum bearing weight of the bridge deck? Okay, that's a pretty obvious question. How are those bridge piers going to be erected? Okay, they have to be driven into a lake bed. Do you know what's in the lake bed? No. Is it sand? Is there bedrock down there somewhere? And all of those questions really must be answered before you begin, plus the fact that it's going to have to cross a 6-mile span. So this is the vision, and somebody envisioned that very clearly. Okay, it's not that hard, except it is that hard. The details are the devil is in the details. So you can think that through for yourselves. So I leave this portion of the conversation with a challenge, and it's a challenge that I think should be entered into at the very beginning, but I don't see where, if it isn't at the beginning, it really has to be answered sometime. You know, if I had my solution today, and I had it in my hands today, what would it be doing? Somebody knew that when they looked at the bridge, they said, I know what this bridge is going to be doing. It's going to be ferrying traffic. What is it going to be doing? This is not actually such a hard question, but somebody has to do it, and it has to be clear. And that's where our tools in architecture and MBSE and Agile can come together as a fusion, as an effective fusion that sadly won't work unless we do crystallize to this degree for our bigger projects.
And is device the same, the advice the same for smaller projects or people that aren't in the complex environments?
You know, I think like most things with Agile, there's an adaptation.
Yeah.
You know, it's and you could say Agile or not Agile. I'm in a very, I have to tell you, brand independent perspective. It's engineering, okay? And we want to do that engineering as efficiently as possible. Call it Agile, call it whatever you wish. But if you're looking for the suite of things that you know you must do, there are probably some that you don't have to do when you think of shrinking down your to a smaller size, to a smaller scale. However, I'd say there isn't probably a kind of a project that can be done without a clear idea. The opposite.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite of, and I worked, believe it or not, before I was in graduate school, I worked in a business, the advertising business. And there were lots of our customers who said, I'll know it when I see it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was our constant torment.
Mm-hmm.
That's very hard.
Yeah.
Of course, you have infinite dollars to spend, no problem.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
We can build that bridge on wooden piers. We can try everything, you know. But usually that's not the case. Usually you have to control costs. And usually we want predictable outcomes. And that's the heart of engineering, if you ask me.
So our prime audience today obviously are in complex environments. So they find themselves wrestling with complexities of new technologies, high expectations, and unclear path forwards. Where do they start? What's your best advice there?
And so I think I've articulated where they can
Mm-hmm.
start, but if they haven't started there,
Mm-hmm.
whether they start with or without the clear architecture, without
Mm-hmm.
clear requirements, they need to stop and reconsider and say, we need to begin again. And I can tell an example I have. It's an actual consultant story, someone I knew that had been away from the Software Engineering Institute for quite a number of years and came back and we stopped in the hall to talk, and he just quickly described that he had just completed an engagement with a customer that had 30 million lines of COBOL code. 30 million lines. That's a lot of code. And what they were trying to do is to figure out what it was doing, because they had to make modifications and changes. And I would say that the number of programs that are in that position is still larger than the number that are just starting up. That's why it's kind of hard to hear some of the way I'm talking, because it sounds like I'm going to talk at a 30,000 foot level. What can I do? Well, what you can do is essentially what our consultant was doing in this case. They found at the heart of this 30 million line blob a control object. Some people call it a God object, okay? But it was the control for the entirety of the rest of the body of software that they were analyzing. And you would have to have, in certain cases, that's a particularly hard case, right? But that's the kind of analysis you would need to ultimately extract what you believe your as-built architecture is today, and then develop a strategy for how am I going to modify that in any sort of systematic way. And so I'm kind of thinking in vision fashion here.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about why we start off with the Star Wars scroll there.
Yeah.
And it's because I was inspired thinking back on the original Star Wars movie. And I'll show you, I had an image for you all. I had an image, but intellectual property concerns means that I can't post it. So if you yourselves feel like going out and doing a little search right now, I think if you use the term Star Wars Death Star hologram, in your image catalog, you should pull up what I'm about to talk about. Many of you, no doubt, can remember and have seen the original Star Wars movie. So you'll know that at kind of the zenith of the movie, the Rebel army is contemplating how they're going to attack the Death Star being this small moon-sized weapons platform that's about to blow them up. And so they have to go to war with this thing. And the hologram serves as a kind of representation. I give credit to George Lucas for having foreseen where I think where we're going to go in the digital engineering revolution. And by showing that hologram, there are implications that we know right away we know that the rebel army could develop its entire attack strategy based on an understanding of a 2-meter large port on the side of the Death Star. Well, how would that be? That would mean that the implication for the diagram is that it's completely decomposed from a very seriously disciplined structural model. Yeah. And so I think that's an interesting implication from the movie. They find it that way, they illustrate it that way, they're able to zoom in and see. I think this is probably the vision of our future. We're definitely not there yet. Another thing you notice about that image, though, is that there are lots of people standing around the outside. In that case, it's the rebel leadership and certain people from the developer staff. They're all looking on to the hologram, and they're able to converse about the details of what they're seeing. And this is another aspect that's very, very important to the title of this presentation. It's visibility, bringing to visibility, gaining elevation on the problem. How do we do that? We do that by this means, by representations, first as architecture, then represented in models, which can be decomposed and in careful conjunction with requirements and with non-functional requirements, so that teams of developers then now all of a sudden 2-week increments can make sense. Why? Because they understand the targets. The targets are identified. But this is an exercise that I have not actually seen in very many places done very well.
What have you seen on real programs? If we can get practical, and what about modeling?
Well, for modeling, in the modeling case, so I have both sets of backgrounds now, modeling and Agile implementation. So in the modeling case, I just came away from a program not long ago where modeling was used extensively for a very large and complex enterprise. And so in many cases, master modelers. But there's something that the scaled Agile people say that's a very nice comment, at least in the scaled Agile framework. They say, optimize the whole. Well, that's the problem, is oftentimes people have not put together the vision such that they can answer the question, if I had my model today, if I had my solution today, what would it be doing? And the answer can be very complicated. It can be doing 1,000 things, but you need to be able to answer that question. In this case, we have this river of activities, people modeling over here, modeling over there, but these are battalions of people doing development and modeling simultaneously. How do you cause them to coalesce? And I'll put a plug in for a research project that I'm working on called MB Synergy that is at the heart, by the way, of trying to get at this problem by virtue of language, because the problem is the modeling teams don't have common language. They don't have common methods. One model does not necessarily relate across the interface to another model, and so on and so forth like that, let alone the integration of models into a single sight picture that says, here's our solution.
Right. So you talked about your Agile background being 2008. When did you learn about MBSE? It seems to me like a little bit of a newer term from where I sit.
Yeah.
Is it a buzzword? Like some people say it's a buzzword, it's a fad. Like,
well, I think
where did you learn about
it? Actually, model-based systems engineering is very interesting to me because it has not come across as a fad. I don't think the people that know it are deeply engaged. These are committed engineers that are very focused on on modeling as an exercise of itself, and that can be a problem. One of our interrogators at the beginning mentioned that, modeling for modeling's sake is not the point here.
Yeah.
The point is to have models representing systems engineering. And so it's not new. Actually, a problem with model-based systems engineering is that it took probably at least 10 years of development within the community, but at the same time, not always optimally effective. And because of that reputation, it's not considered as sexy as some of the other things going on. I would argue that, a fad has nothing to do with it. We're trying to do basic, deep engineering, and this is the path forward.
Right.
That's my prejudice, but there are a lot of modelers behind me now. So.
Right. Great answer. We touched on just enough a little bit. Anything else you want to add about? It was one of our learner points about you mentioning just enough. Like, what does it mean? Can we dive into that again?
Well, just enough.
Yeah.
The reason for my mentioning just enough is that it's to avoid this throwing the baby out with the bathwater phenomenon that has happened with some programs. When they encounter Agile, they'll say, oh, well, let's get rid of all that documentation that we formerly had to do. And I worked on one program where they're developing, again, a structure not less expansive than that bridge. And yet the first impressions among the team was this relief about not having to produce all of what are called C drills.
Right.
And after about 9 months, it was then announced, no, you still have to do the documentation. Okay, so what do we do now, right? And the just enough idea is simply to have enough thought up front to say, look, what can we eliminate? It's essentially the same question you asked, can we shrink this down any? You have to have some sort of architecture to represent a structure as massive as that bridge, but you don't want a structure that can't be changed. You don't want a model that can't be changed. There are even stories about bridges that were almost completely built. There was one in particular, and I can't remember the specific bridge, or I would. They got to the end, and the two ends didn't meet. There was an overlap. They solved it. It's very cleverly. They solved it by packing the entire end of the structure in ice. Okay.
Wow.
But you talk about commitment. Okay. So as the design is built, as it's built incrementally, this is why I advocate architecture, because architecture is kind of a minimalist way to begin the process.
Right. Switching gears a little bit here, providing some guidance about applying MBSE to legacy system versus new system. What's your advice there for folks? I'm sure a lot of people in that situation.
So we haven't had any incoming?
No, nothing yet.
Okay. Yeah. So so you asked for guidance. So here are my four, and I'm not saying, and I'm gonna talk about where I was hoping to go, because you were kind enough to ask me. But
absolutely.
But my four would be: have a systems architect. I mean, this is an individual with extreme knowledge and extreme ability with regards to engineering the target system. So it's not just anybody. It's someone who knows architecture and knows what the relevance of architecture is going to be for the design. Then, depending on the scope of the endeavor, right? I would have modelers and even teams of modelers. But again, they would have to be modelers who understand that their collaboration is key, that they're going to have to work into terms that are going to be communicated across the teams, and have representatives from each of these teams coordinating throughout their engagement, and that in the end they're supporting the development. And so these should not be operating independently in silos. And that's something that's been said by many others other than myself. I personally, I would say ensure strong requirements control. That'll come off badly with some folks. You say requirements control, they're thinking absolutely firm requirements. No, that's not what I mean. It's not the same as requirements locked down, but what I mean is that your requirements should be understood, and they can be modeled. There are programs designed specifically for modeling requirements and being able to look at them, and you should be able to, so that they're visible to all, measurable. Of course, everyone says measurable, but they They must be measurable and must be constructed properly, including the non-functional requirements. Again, non-functional requirements, they speak to the capabilities you're delivering ultimately.
Right.
And so that's why I keep emphasizing the non-functional requirements. It's surprising to me that they're called that, but they are. Establish the necessary lines of communication, and this is my last point. Establish necessary lines of communication, and then it has to do with not siloing. Very hard for people not to silo. They silo according to mechanical engineers and electrical engineers and who's doing what when. They must have some forcing function to cause people to collaborate, and they have to collaborate fairly frequently. And those are my points.
So you mentioned having an architecture. What if the program doesn't have an architecture up front? Can you retrofit one?
So architects will say you always have an architecture.
Okay.
I don't know that I fully agree with that assessment, but who am I to say? The point is you'll have a structure. You'll have a structure, and in some instances you may not be able to tear that structure apart. You may be talking about having to move on to another generation. Okay. So once you've locked yourself into a design and you've gone ahead with development, you're not in as good a position as at the outset. And I think most of my audience will know that.
When you guys wrote the report for Crosstalk, what has the feedback you guys been getting from the community? Is this something that's considered groundbreaking? Is it like what have you heard?
So I've done
Yeah.
a fair number of
Yeah.
peer-reviewed articles,
Yeah.
and I can't speak to it, but I have to say, it's boastful, but
Yeah.
I have to say the comment I got back from the reviewer was this is brilliant. That was nice. No changes.
Sure.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
No, come on. I'm a graybeard now.
Yeah.
Here it is, gray, right? I didn't expect that. I still
Yep.
feel 17, but anyway, that was a nice kind of present to get. And then we've got a lot of comments that have been coming across via LinkedIn and
Yeah.
other means, and there's a big enthusiasm for the points that
Yeah.
were made in that article is all I can say.
So if people want to get a hold of you, collaborate with the SEI, what's the best way to do it?
Well, first of
Yeah.
all, you asked
Yeah.
me at the outset, what
Yep.
was my goal?
Yeah. Yeah. What
And
was
I
your
wanted
yeah.
to say this, and then I'll show where we can get in touch. But it's a humble goal because coming out of this, all I'm hoping is that this discussion continues about the alignment of architecture, modeling, and
Mhm.
development. That the discussion continues among the people who can make changes where the changes are going to matter. I think it's absolutely essential to get on top of this because right now there's a bit too much of an emphasis of the cart running ahead and people more or less,
Sure.
we don't want that anymore. We want a controlled implementation and with controlled results. And so my goal is to simply have the conversation continue. As to, let's see, I'll advance to the end here. I think that's where I am. Oh, there's one more point. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Having to do with alignment. We have time?
Yeah, we got that.
Having to do with alignment.
Yep.
This is a great slide. You might want to copy its source. It's about what's missing. It's about just not enough, if you ask me, okay?
Mhm.
So if we look down, we look at the consequences towards the end on the right-hand column, you'll see you get change when you have vision, resources, capable workforce, capable processes, organizational culture, incentives, and action plan are in order. They are aligned. That's the picture of alignment across the top. Each step as you walk through these, we drop out a piece, we drop out vision, and we get confusion. Surprise.
Mhm.
Drop out resources, and so on.
Yep.
So take a moment. Beyond that, if you'd like to be in touch, this is how.
Yeah, and then we got a question. We can get to that in a second, Peter. But we'll leave that slide up for a second.
Okay.
One other one I just had. I know the SEI is hosting a workshop at the end of this month or August, sometime in August, later in August. The model-based system engineering workshop. Something you'll be involved with or speaking at, or anything you know about it that we can share?
I know
with the
about
audience?
it. I don't believe
Okay.
I'll be a featured speaker.
Okay.
And also I wanted to give a proviso at the beginning of this thing. If you think we're going to talk here about the nuances of SysML2 and interrelationships with UAF and Cameo? No, this is not the Peter Capell talk.
Okay.
But I'm looking forward to the MBSE.
So you might nix this question, but we did get one from Dan asking, as a software architect, I find Plant UML to be a very useful, lightweight tool to support modeling of the software product directly into the code base. What are your thoughts, opinions on Plant UML? Do you have any?
I really, my experience, I'll tell you frankly, my experience is largely Cameo based. And that seems to be the tool, has been the tool of comfort with my customers. But I have to say, if you found a tool that can get people to be using models, actually communicating about models, talking models, not afraid of them, and willing to be just having the discussion around the system via the model, then you've had a success. The question I might want to know is a head-to-head comparison. If my implementation is going to become a lot more complex, will Plant UML handle that complexity? That would be the question, because I've heard of these other programs.
Sure.
I just
One from Arthur asking, what obstacles to MBSE adoption do you see in a typical business environment? Do you have suggestions for how to address them?
the suggestion I would be is that well, hopefully some of the leadership is here, right? And seeing what I'm talking about, that you really can't proceed without vision. And to me, in the digital engineering revolution, MBSE is a pillar, the pillar upon which it's not all encompassing, but it is a pillar. A lot of things have to change. And so I would say the main obstacle is kind of people not knowing what they're trying to get out of it. It's why I suggested the other title of the article is, what do you think you're doing?
Right.
So people have to clearly identify what it is they want to do and say, will a modeling language help me? Will it help me? And virtually in a case of almost any complexity, I say it will help you as long as you have people on the same page. And that's the hardest part, believe it or not, getting leadership in a clear channel to their management and then to the developers. This is a chain that has to be attended to.
Dan had chimed in, yes, that's one of the biggest benefits of Plant UML in my experience. Having it in the code base means my software engineers actually look at it and contribute to it more readily. So he said, thank you.
Yeah, some programs are quite complex to use. And so if the interface isn't going to help you do that, and a big complaint, say what's tending to happen with modeling. We've had the case where the program that I just worked on, in fact, they wanted us to build models that could output to Excel. This is not the right way to go, okay? It may be necessary as an interim step, but when we're talking about the digital engineering revolution, where we want to have everyone really communicating effectively and strategically and tactically to a point, they need to have common use of tools and common language, and they need to understand MBSE.
We had talked a little bit when we were talking last week just about software factories and the success within the DoD. Is it something they need to be adding in? They are adding in, or what's their
I think it's just
success and so
happening. I
forth?
think the software factory is just kind of a very obvious idea. It is going to happen. It's like any other thing, though. Modeling is happening. MBSE is happening. How effectively is it being deployed? And how effectively it's being deployed will be in a large part contingent on the site picture developed by engineering management and leadership.
Okay. Well, the queue is open, so any questions, feel free to get them in. Feel free to get them in now. Otherwise, Peter, any closing thoughts? Anything you want to point people to? I know that we had talked about the crosstalk article that people can follow up with.
Read our article.
Yeah,
that's a plug. But besides that, I guess I would start thinking about connecting the visions. I've walked through many, many, many program offices now, and we see a lot of the visions. They're expressed on the wall in big posters, and I've always wondered what's going on here? Because there's often a disconnect. And I would say, let's start connecting those bigger visions to operational reality. and do so by virtue of architecture, MBSE, and Agile development practices.
Dan had chimed in again. Have you seen any effective implementations that integrate the software factory and the MBSE model? Have we had any experience with that?
Not to pull out of the back pocket. By the way, though, not to leave you hanging, if, like I said, if you send an email to the screen, I will facilitate trying to get a good answer for that. It's not always easy because not everybody can reveal what's going on, but if we have examples, I'm happy to dig them up. Yep.
Yeah, if you scan that QR code or just send email to info@sei.cmu.edu, we can connect you with the right folks. Peter, thanks for your presentation today. Really enjoyed the discussion and you sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Lastly, we thank you all for attending today. Upon exiting, please hit the like button below the video window and share the archive. And you can subscribe to the SEI's YouTube channel by clicking on the SEI seal in the lower right corner of the video window. Our next webcast will be August 27th. And the topic will be quantum computing meets high performance computing skills in the class. Registration information will be on the SEI website soon and will be emailed out as well. As I mentioned, any questions from today, please send to info@sei.cmu.edu. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.